Alright, I've been gone for a minute, so let's not waste any time. This transfer window was crazy, especially in North America, and I want to talk about it. So here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to pick a team, talk about how they performed last split, then talk about how the roster change will affect their playstyle moving forward, and finally I'll give them a grade that doesn't really matter. But grades are fun, so why not? Alright, let's get into it. Looking back on it, Guild has been one of the most confusing teams so far this season. In RLCS X, they were really good, finishing 4th in overall standings and 5th in the European Championship. But despite this, they still decided to make a roster move, replacing Tho for Bluey. And when they made this move, I thought that the reason for it was obvious when you looked at the stats. I don't mean this as an insult because a lot of the time this can be a really good thing, but Tho is a bit of a ball chaser in RLCS X. He would constantly zoom around the field and put pressure on the ball, being as close to it as possible. On the other hand, Nolly would hang back far away from the ball, waiting for his chance to come in and take possession without double committing with Tho. So while Tho was a really good player for Guild last season, I think that most people would agree in saying that Nolly was their best player, and the team usually benefits from having their best player get the ball as often as possible. And I thought that this was the goal for this roster move. Replacing Tho with Bluey would, in theory, clear up a lot of space around the ball and give Nolly more chances to move in and possess the ball himself. But this did not happen. Nolly would still set up far away from the ball and be more patient on offense. The only difference now is that instead of Tho putting on ball pressure for Guild, nobody was. In fact, all 3 players for Guild are in the top 10 for farthest average distance from the ball, with Bluey being even farther than Nolly. This lack of pressure was a death sentence for the team. It made it hard for them to get possession and affected their offense, giving them the 3rd fewest goals per game as a team so far this season in Europe. But it also hurt their defense, because opponents would have a lot of space with the ball. On this play, when Redosin gets the ball in the corner, Bluey is stuck upfield with no boost, while Devo and Nolly are retreating back to get some boost of their own, giving Redosin plenty of space with the ball. When Devo does get the side boost and turns for the challenge, Redosin already has full control of the play and is easily able to get past him. Then, with Nolly so far back and Bluey still trying to recover with no boost, Redosin is able to hand the ball off to Sizen, even though he was literally on the other side of the field when the play started. He beats Bluey to the touch, with Redosin getting a demo for good measure, and hits the ball off the corner to send it back into the middle of the field, where they have plenty of space for the shot. In fact, all 3 players for Williams Resolve are in the area for the shot. Sizen leaves the ball for his teammates, and Redosin goes to bump Nolly in goal, and Prime easily scores it. But CRR looks like the player who can fix this issue for Guild. While all 3 Guild players hang back away from the ball, CRR has been in the top 10 for closest average distance to the ball both last season and so far this season. But on top of just putting on pressure, he's a really good player in general, especially on offense, being in the top 10 in goals per game this season. With this roster move, it kinda seems like Guild will have to go back to last season's playstyle, with one player putting on the pressure, Nolly swooping in through the created chaos to deal the finishing blow, and Devo filling in the gaps where needed, mostly in midfield defense. But doing so well last season proved that this is a good formula, and I think that it'll help them out again this season. So I'll give this roster move a B+. Yeah, sure, why not? Alright, next team. This roster move honestly makes me a little sad. Illusion was an afterthought for fans when watching this team, and it's almost impossible not to be when your 2 teammates are First Killer and AJ. Heck, even I overlooked them, because in my season preview when I talked about Faze, I spent literally all of the time talking about First and AJ, because they deserve that much attention. In the 3 regionals, First Killer and AJ were 1st and 3rd in Octane rating respectively in North America, and they are both in the top 10 for both goals and assists per game. Meanwhile, Illusion was 10th from the bottom in Octane rating, and was closer to the middle of the region for goals and assists. But despite having lower stats, he was still a great player for this team, consistently putting his teammates in better positions to make plays. And this was most apparent in the Fall Major, where he was constantly passing up shooting chances to get the ball to his teammates instead, letting them take the shot. This play starts with First Killer giving Illusion an infield pass, and instead of taking the shot directly, he pops the ball straight up in the air. There are a couple of potential reasons for this, but regardless, he immediately jumps up and takes flight after the ball. Being so close to the goal, most players in this scenario would see this as a shooting chance, and would try to get the ball on target somehow. But instead, with his second touch, Illusion hits the ball off to the right, where First Killer is waiting in the corner. Once it's clear that First Killer has the next touch, Illusion leans back away from the ball, giving First Killer as much space as possible. First jumps off the wall and hits the ball cleanly, knocking in the tight angle shot over Seiko. Illusion led the team in assists at LAN, and he even played well enough to be dubbed LAN Lucian by the fans, which I think is a terrible nickname, but that's not the point. He was instrumental in getting Faze to the semifinals of that major, and as it stands, Faze is 2nd place in North America, and have established themselves as a contender for being the best team in the region. For most teams, this would be enough for them to stick together and try to push through to the top. But Faze Clan isn't like most teams, and instead, they went out and picked up one of the only players that would justify a roster move, grabbing Sypical from Spacestation, which unfortunately has left Illusion without a team. Now, I love Illusion, but after this roster move, this team is absolutely terrifying. With First Killer and AJ being so good with the ball in their possession, the best thing that Faze could do is find a player who manages to dominate the game while not needing the ball very much. And there might not be another player in the entire world who does that better than Sypical. So far this season, Sypical is 6th in Octane rating, behind only Garrett, Chicago, AJ, Justin, and First Killer, which is really good company to be in. But Sypical manages to have this crazy production despite having the farthest average distance from the ball on his team. So he doesn't need to be around the ball constantly to have an offensive impact. But while he's a great offensive player, he's probably even better on defense. He's always had a great ability to shut down the opponent's attack whenever he's in the area, whether that's in the midfield during transition or in the goal making saves. He's 5th in saves per game individually and helped Spacestation allow the 3rd fewest goals per game as a team this season. Spacestation had an identity of being really defensive and boring as a team, and a lot of that was because of Sypical's defensive dominance. But now, he's bringing that defense to Faze Clan to pair up with First Killer and AJ's unstoppable and suffocating offense. Not to mention that First and AJ are also really good defenders in their own right. Looking at this team on paper, I really can't find one weakness. They're elite from top to bottom, and regardless of whoever you think is their worst player, he would still be better than most other teams' best player. And if you ask me, this is now the best team in North America. So as much as I'm sad about Illusion, this move has to be an A+. Spacestation's fall split was a bit of a disappointment, but I don't think it was nearly as bad as a lot of people out there thought it was. A lot of them thought Spacestation needed a roster change to get back to the top of North America where they belonged, but I didn't think that was necessary. They were still a really good team, and they were extremely close to making it to the major, being one game away from qualifying 2 different times, first against Team Envy in Regional 3, and then again against Complexity in the tiebreaker, but sadly they couldn't pull it out either time. Spacestation is the team that's known for their defensive playstyle. They would win games by playing solid defense, using each other effectively on offense, and not making any mistakes. But last split, they made a few more mistakes than you'd come to expect from them. And when you win games by shutting down the opponent's offense and keeping the game low scoring, defensive mistakes that turn into free goals for the opponents can make it that much harder for your team to win. Even Sypical, who has always been solid and nearly mistake-free, made a couple of bad mistakes that would cost his team goals, like here in the fall major tiebreaker against Complexity. Reddles loses the 50 in the corner, and the ball floats up above the goal and above Sypical, who's on the near post with a full tank of boost ready to deal with it. But he completely misses the read and can't correct himself in the air fast enough to get the ball, so it floats straight down to Razebull, who gets the easy goal and puts Complexity up by 2. And the 2-goal lead ended up being too much for Spacestation to overcome in the decisive Game 7. Despite errors like this being more common for Spacestation, this is still something that's easily fixable for the team. And besides, I don't think that going from 2nd in RLCS X to 6th so far this season is enough to justify a roster change. And it seems that the team didn't either, because they were in position to stick together heading into the next split. But Faze Clan had other plans and decided to force them into a roster change anyways. With Sypical moving to Faze, Spacestation was stuck in the unlucky position of trying to find a replacement for their best player. But they did about as well as they could by picking up North America's best prospect in Daniel. Daniel has been in the spotlight for a while now, making a permanent home near the top of the ranked leaderboards, and dominating 1v1 show matches on both Johnny Boy's and Fear's channel, so the talent is obviously there. But one thing that surprises me is how good of a fit he seems to be for this team. When people hear about a young up-and-coming player, they probably imagine a really speedy, really mechanical player who looks to possess the ball as much as possible and score crazy goals whenever he has the chance. And this profile fit a lot of rookies when they first entered the pro scene, with First Killer, Beast Mode, Seiko, and Archie being just a few examples. But Daniel really hasn't fit this mold so far in his short career. He of course is very mechanical and scores great goals, but he isn't nearly as ball chasey as you might expect a young player like him to be. In fact, from what I've seen out of him so far, he's actually extremely composed and methodical, and he positions himself very defensively compared to his teammates. In Astronaut Star Circuit Season 4, Daniel was 8th in total time spent as farthest back on the team, and had the 4th least time spent as farthest forward. He also had the 5th most saves per game, and was in the bottom 12 for the amount of boosts stolen. All of these numbers show his comfort level with playing more defensively and conservatively. This defensive playstyle will help him easily fit into Sypical's role on Spacestation, and minimize the damage from his departure. So I'm going to give this move an A. And not because I think Daniel is an upgrade over Sypical, I still think Sypical is the better player. But given the circumstances, I don't think Spacestation could have done any better with this move. I feel like Thor has gotten a pretty rough deal for these last couple of transfer windows. Despite being an impactful player for two pretty good teams, he has still found himself being replaced after each of the last two splits. With Guild, Tho is one of the fastest and most aggressive players in the entire region, being 4th in average speed and leading the region in time spent as closest to the ball for all of RLCS X. But since joining this team, he has reined in that aggressiveness a bit, slightly dropping his average speed and increasing his average distance from the ball from last season to this season. And a big reason for this change is that Oli matches his speed and aggressiveness a lot of the time, having almost the exact same average speed and distance to the ball. With Violent Panda being the most defensive player on this team behind this 1-2 punch, Heroic turned into a pretty strong team and even got a top 8 finish under their belt. But after a poor finish in their last event, getting swept out of the Swiss stage in Regional 3, where frankly none of the players played that well, they decided to make a change, replacing Tho for Yukio. And as far as playstyles are concerned, you might not find two players more different than these guys. Where Tho likes to go fast, Yukio likes to go slow. And where Tho likes to attack the ball and put on pressure, Yukio hangs back and plays more passively. Unless someone makes a drastic change to the playstyle they've shown so far this season, this Heroic team is going to look very different moving forward than they did in the fall split. And I can't help but wonder why they wanted to go more defensive with this roster change. It's very possible that Violent Panda and Coach Verge just have a great relationship with Yukio from their time together on Dignitas, and they picked him up for the team chemistry element, which honestly doesn't seem like that bad of an idea to me. Based off of their Twitter post, they seem pretty excited to be reunited, and good chemistry is key in having a good Rocket League team. But despite that, I'm not sure if the on-field fit works out now the same way it did back with Dignitas. On that team, Yukio and Panda were playing passively to support Astral's offense, but now they're going to be supporting Oli. I think that Oli is a great player, and I even mentioned him in my Players to Watch video before the season started. But trying to replicate Astral's production is really hard to do, no matter how you look at it. My grades have been really nice so far, but it's finally time to give somebody a low grade. And I'm going to give this roster move a C-, but I'm more than ready to eat those words if they prove me wrong. I don't ever give any love to the other regions, so let's take a minute to highlight the biggest roster moves in South America and Oceania. In South America, Noble Esports decided to make a change and take Math from Era Eternity, replacing Drufinho. At first glance, I didn't think that a roster move was really necessary, because even though Era Eternity were the ones that qualified for the major, I still felt like Noble was the better team. Era only beat out Noble for the major by 1 single point, and out of the 3 times that the two teams played each other, Noble won 2 of them. Honestly, it feels like the main reason that Era ended up with more points were because of some fortunate draws all split. Furia is the best team in the region, and Noble played against them 4 times, losing 3 of those matches, including 2 losses in the bracket stage, making them lose out on more potential points. Meanwhile, Era didn't play against Furia a single time. If you take just one of those matches that Noble played against Furia and give it to Era instead, Furia probably takes the victory, making Era lose out on some points and giving Noble the edge that they would have needed to make the major. But, as luck would have it, Era were the ones that qualified, and Noble looked for a roster move. But, to their credit, Noble did very well for themselves by taking Era's best player, Math. Math led the team in goals, assists, and saves, and was key in just about every good thing that happened for Era. So with one move, Noble both improved their own roster while hurting the roster of their biggest competitor for top 2, and I can't help but see that as a great move. So I'm giving that an easy A. Meanwhile in OCE, the most prominent roster move was Wildcard Gaming picking up Mach from the Grogans after losing one of their players to a 2-year ban. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm starting to get kinda confused with OCE. I figure there has to be something going on that I don't know about, because Hawk is one of the best players in the region, but it seems like he's never been considered for these type of roster moves. He was the region's most hyped prospect after he competed in DreamHack Montreal alongside CJ and Express in 2019 at the age of 13. And ever since coming into RLCS last season, he has looked great, especially on offense. Last season, where he only played in 3 events, he led OCE in goals per game at 1.31, which was 0.2 more than Siki, who was in 2nd place. And so far this season, he is once again leading the region in goals per game, while also being 3rd in saves and 3rd in shooting percentage. But on top of that, for the few matches of his that I've been able to watch so far this season, he has looked really, really good. I truly feel like he's one of the best players in the region, and if Wildcard Gaming picked him up to go alongside Siki, who is 3rd in goals per game this season after being 2nd last season, and Caveman Ben, who is 4th in goals this season, then I think that Wildcard would have a team that is truly ready to compete with Ground Zero and Renegades for top 2 in spite of the majors. I don't know why they would pass this guy up, so if there are any OCE experts out there, please give your thoughts in the comments. But for now, I'm going to give this move a D. No disrespect to Mach because he's a really good player too, but if it's between him and Hawk, I know who I'd want. This team was looking really good for a while in the fall split. Heading into Regional 3, they were tied for 4th with Complexity, Spacestation, and Envy, and they were in prime position to compete for a spot at the Major. But in that regional, they were swept out of the Swiss stage and lost their chance to the Major about as quickly as they could. And in that last regional, while the whole team played pretty poorly, Gimmick was especially lacking in the offensive impact that you expect from him, being bottom 5 in Octane rating, while also being in the bottom half for goals and assists for that event. Gimmick is historically known for his high-flying, super aggressive offensive style, and he often relies on this style so much that when he's not making an impact on offense, he usually doesn't make an impact anywhere on the field, which ended up being the case for this event. But his struggles extended beyond just Regional 3 for him, as he had the fewest goals and assists for his team in all 3 events. Last season, Gimmick was pretty even with Com in time spent as farthest forward down the field and average distance to the ball, with both of them being close to the ball very often. These two would often share the offensive playmaking and aggression responsibilities with each other pretty evenly, with Torment of course hanging back more defensively to cover for them. But this season, Com has started to overtake Gimmick in those two stats, which I think shows the team's preference to have Com take command of the offense, rather than having him split that responsibility with Gimmick. So when you have a player that's as offensively focused as Gimmick, but he starts to have less and less time and responsibility on the ball, while also not managing to make much of an impact in other areas of the field, then I'd say that's a pretty good time to make a roster change. And if you're looking for somebody to fill in for offensive production, there aren't many players who will do a better job than Beast Mode. He's only played in one RLCS event so far this season, but he still did very well for himself, finishing 7th in goals per game, despite his team as a whole not playing very well. He's made his mark by being able to take command of the offense with great passing and great shooting, plus great awareness to always make the right play on offense. And in his first year as a pro in RLCS X, he showed steady improvement throughout the entire season, and by the end of the spring split, he was one of the region's best players. With Beast Mode on the roster, version 1 has potential to be a very scary team. So I'll go ahead and give this roster move an A-. After a disappointing fall split, Team Power has brought in 2 new players to team up with Forky. And I'm just kidding, I'm not actually going to talk about this team. I don't think it would be an understatement to call SK Gaming one of the most underwhelming teams of the fall. After a good showing in last season's spring split, finishing 5th in the standings for that split, and making it all the way to the semifinals of the Major, expectations were high for the team coming into the new season. But unfortunately, they have not lived up to them so far, currently standing at 13th place in Europe and only making it to the top 8 in one event. While it's definitely unfair to pin all the blame on one player, because the whole team has been pretty disappointing, I'm really surprised at how much Ixo has struggled so far this season, and his struggles are a big reason for SK doing as poorly as they did. Last season, Ixo was one of the best scorers in the entire region, finishing 5th in goals per game at 0.81, behind Nali, Atomic, Archie, and Ronicky. When this team came together last spring, he was easily the most aggressive player, and his goal scoring was needed for the team to have success. But so far this season, he has the 10th fewest goals per game, and SK's offense has fallen off of a cliff, as they have the 2nd fewest goals per game out of all RLCS teams in Europe. If Ixo isn't producing, then the team isn't producing, and that has come back to bite them hard this season. So with the new split came a new roster move, bringing in Atomic to replace Yukio. And this move should immediately boost their offense. Even though Atomic's team and Giants have also struggled so far this season, Atomic has still managed to put up elite numbers, currently being top 10 in the region in both goals and assists per game. So if Ixo is able to find his form again, they should have a great 1-2 punch on the front end, while Tox holds down the back line and even shows off his own shooting ability from time to time. I think that this move addresses a need for them, while also eliminating some redundant tendencies between Tox and Yukio, and I think that's pretty good. So let's give it a B+. This move is one of the more interesting to me, because I think it's one of the hardest to predict how it'll work out. First, I think that it should be said that you can go back and forth between who you think is the better player between Mist and Atomic, and I personally think that Mist is the better player. But regardless, I think that Atomic is the player that they could least afford to lose. When Envy had the ball, Atomic was their main offensive spark, and this spark made him the best passer in the region in my opinion, but more on him in the next section. Drees did a great job of fitting into G2's playstyle by playing extremely fast and doing his part to always keep the ball moving on offense. He was able to do this so well because he had the speed and mechanics to keep up with an offensive attack as aggressive as G2's. I'm sure a big reason for Drees going as fast as he was is because he wanted to fit into G2's playstyle and not slow things down. Even after the team talked with him last season and told him to not worry so much about fitting in and to just play his own game. That's kinda hard to do when you're playing with teammates as good as Chicago and JNAPS when you're only a rookie, especially when their playstyle has proven to be effective for so long. But now, he is in a completely different scenario. Because while G2 was a very offensive team, Envy was basically the opposite, being very defensive, and getting a lot of their goals out of counterattacks after long defensive stands. Atomic would often be the primary ball handler for them in these scenarios, and his leaving for G2 means that there will be a lot of extra space on the ball for Dries to do what he wants with it. So playing alongside Miss, one of the best all-around players in the game, and Turbopulsar, the best support player that this game has ever seen, Dries will have the ultimate freedom in creating whatever playstyle he wants for himself, and I can't wait to see the type of player that he turns into for them. But to give this move a grade, I'll give it a B-, only because according to Shift, Envy also gave Beast Mode a try out, and I think that he would have been a better fit for this team than Dries. Beast Mode has already shown that he has the ability to carry an offensive load for this team, and that ability would have been great for them in replacing Atomic. But regardless, Dries is still a really good pickup, and I think that Envy has a really good shot of maintaining their spot as one of the best teams in the region. While I don't think this is the best move of the transfer window, that honor goes to Faze Clan. This move is still my favorite. Ever since G2 signed Chicago 3 years ago, this team has been known for one thing more than any other: offensive pressure. They're constantly taking shots and stealing boosts, locking defenses into their own half, and wearing them down until they inevitably score. And this playstyle hasn't changed at all this season, with G2 being second in goals per game in the region, behind only Faze Clan, and first in shots per game. And each of G2's players have had their own flashes of greatness throughout the season, with Chicago leading North America in goals per game, and JNAPS leading the region in assists per game. Meanwhile, Dries has done more than his fair share of work as well, being second on the team in goals and assists, and leading the team in saves. His primary contribution to the offensive attack was speed, by beating opponents to the ball at will, and hitting it hard and fast once he got there. This speed played a key part in G2 finishing 3rd place in the region after the fall split, and getting them their first regional win since the format changed at the start of Season X. But even with this impressive finish, G2 felt there was room for improvement after the fall major. So, they brought in Atomic to replace Dries, and I am extremely excited to see how they play together. The closest comparison I could make to G2's current offense is a sledgehammer hitting a door. The first swing may not bring the door down, but no matter how strong the door is, if the hammer gets enough swings in, the door will eventually break, and G2 always keeps swinging until the defense breaks down. But Atomic has never really fit this mold. Envy is more of a counter-attacking team, and he was a big reason for this. His creativity and playmaking with the ball would allow Envy to finish off their offensive possessions quickly and decisively, a lot of the time after just one attempt. They'd hold down the fort on defense, then give Atomic the ball in transition and let him go to work. At this point against NRG, Envy have been stuck in their own half of the field for about a full minute, but their defense held strong and they managed to get through the pressure without conceding. Now the chance comes for them to get on offense, with Miss clearing the ball downfield and Atomic ready to follow up on it after picking up the side boost. He flies up for it, beating Justin, and hits the ball towards the back wall. The threat for the double tap shot is obviously there. Plus, Garrett and Squishy have no chance of contesting Atomic's next touch, so they both sit in goal and wait for the shot to come. But that leaves an area in front of the goal for Miss to come in and take up the space. So instead of taking the shot himself, Atomic perfectly drops it down into that area, where Mist is able to meet it and knock it home for the goal. And crazy passes like this are very common for Atomic. This season, Atomic is second in time spent closest to the ball, showing his tendency to possess it as much as possible. And while his assist numbers are down a little bit this season, he led North America in assists per game during RLCS X at 0.7. His passing ability and ball control just gives G2 another way to threaten defenses, which they didn't need, but I'm sure they won't complain. And for the grade, I'll give this an A-. I do think Atomic is a better player than Dries, so this roster move is an upgrade in the short term for sure. But G2 had also been showing steady improvement throughout their time with Dries, hitting their peak in the most recent online event with their win in Regional 3. And I would have liked to see him continue to grow with this team, and see just how far they could have gone together. Sure, they missed out on top 8 of the LAN, but Dries played extremely well for his first LAN ever, and I'm sure he'll do even better the next one. But regardless of what could have been with Dries, G2 with Atomic is going to be insanely fun, no matter what happens. Alright, with that, I think it's time we wrap it up. There are a few more teams that I could have talked about, like Rogue or Na'Vi or Oxygen, but this video is already long enough as is. But I hope to see you all in the next video, and until then, as always, thanks for watching.